If you've been collecting long enough, you know the best X-Men stories don't always happen in the main team books. X-Men 97 paid massive tribute to hardcore comic fans by packing the background with an absolute ton of deep-cut mutant cameos. Today we're dusting off the back issues to shine a spotlight on 3 specific era-defining favorites from the late 90s and early 2000s to see why their incredible comic book histories are worth reading. If we're talking about mutants you might have missed in X-Men 97, who are absolutely worth reading, we have to start with Sarah, better known as Marrow. Marvel actually slipped in a couple references to her during the season. She first appeared on a missing persons poster in episode 1, To Me, My X-Men, and then finally showed up in person during episode 5, Remember It. If you were paying attention during the Genosha celebration, you could spot her wearing a green formal dress at the Hellfire Gala, with her trademark bone spikes sticking out before everything went horribly wrong. In the show, she's just another victim of the Genosha massacre, but in the comics, Marrow was anything but a background character. She was loud, angry, unpredictable, and never really fit in with the X-Men. Her first adult appearance came in 1995's X-Men Prime, right in the middle of Marvel's very 90s phase of leather jackets, giant guns, and enough pouches to supply a camping store. From the beginning, she stood out because she brought a much darker, almost horror-inspired feel to the books. While most of the X-Men grew up at Xavier's school, learning to control their powers in a safe environment, Sarah grew up beneath New York as one of the Morlocks, a community of mutants whose physical appearances made it impossible for them to blend into normal society. Her mutation is also one of the most painful in Marvel. Sarah's skeleton never stops growing, forcing jagged pieces of bone to push through her skin over and over again. To fight, she literally has to rip those bones out of her own body and use them as knives, spears, or clubs. Every weapon she uses comes at the cost of tearing herself apart first. And the only reason she can survive it is because of her healing factor closes the wounds almost as quickly as she makes them. One of the more interesting parts of her character is her obsession with beauty. When she was a little girl living in the Morlocks tunnel, she watched Callisto kidnap Angel. To someone who had spent her entire life hiding underground, Angel looked almost unreal. He was handsome, famous, and had giant white wings. Sarah came to believe that the world didn't just fear mutants. It accepted the ones who looked beautiful and rejected the ones who didn't. As she got older, that bitterness turned into outright hatred. Sarah eventually became the leader of Gene Nation, a splinter group of young mutant extremists who weren't interested in peaceful coexistence. They wanted revenge. That all came to a head during one of the most memorable confrontations of the 90s. Marrow strapped a bomb directly to her own heart and challenged Storm to either surrender or kill her. Storm chose the second option without hesitation, reaching into Marrow's chest and ripping her heart out. That should have been the end of her story, but this is the X-Men. Marrow survived because her body had grown a second heart to compensate for the constant trauma caused by her mutation. After that, Marvel made the unexpected decision to put her on the X-Men. She moved into Xavier's mansion, trained under Wolverine, flirted with Cannonball, and always looked like the one person in the room who clearly wasn't comfortable being there. Eventually, she ended up on a Skrull world, where advanced technology stabilized her mutation and gave her a more conventionally attractive appearance. Although a lot of fans felt this took away part of what made her unique. Things only got stranger from there. S.H.I.E.L.D. erased her memories and turned her into a sleeper agent, living under the name Sarah Rushman. When that fell apart, she was recruited into a new version of the Weapon X program. They suppressed her bone growth so she could pass as a normal human, then used that as leverage to force her into becoming an assassin. It didn't last. Sarah eventually turned against Weapon X and tried rebuilding Gene Nation, but Agent Zero tracked the group down and killed every member except Marrow, leaving her alive specifically so she'd have to live with her failure. Then came M-Day. Wanda Maximoff depowered most of the mutant population, and Marrow lost her abilities along with them, leaving behind only a few small bone protrusions and years of emotional baggage. Desperate to get her powers back, Sarah turned to a black market geneticist named Volga. The experiments worked, but they pushed her completely over the edge. Her powers returned, but so did constant hallucinations and severe psychosis. Even worse, she had been pregnant before the procedure, and the experiments cost her the life of her unborn child. When Cable eventually found her, Marrow was talking to an imaginary child she called Baby. Even so, he recruited her to X-Force, where she became one of the team's most unstable members, constantly hallucinating, covering walls and rambling messages, and lashing out with extreme violence whenever she lost control. It wasn't until the Krakoa era that Sarah finally caught a break. The Mutant Nation's advanced medical technology repaired the damage done to both her body and her mind, giving her the first real chance at a normal life she'd ever had. As for where Marvel could take her next, I'd love to see them lean back into what made her interesting in the first place. Forget making her another globe-trotting superhero, turn her into the mutant world's urban legend. Have Sarah protect the forgotten mutants living beneath New York, pulling kids out of trafficking rings, Weapon X labs, and anti-mutant hate groups before they disappear. She can survive injuries that would kill almost anyone, fights with weapons pulled from her own body, and already has the kind of tragic story that makes her believable as someone who refuses to leave people behind. Instead of becoming the terrorist she once was, she could become the person she needed when she was a scared kid hiding in the tunnels. I think Marrow is one of the best examples of how weird, tragic, and surprisingly human the X-Men can be, and that's why you should read her story. Next up is Jonathan Starsmore, better known as Chamber. If you're paying close attention to X-Men 97, his most notable appearance came during the prison breakout in Season 2. Hidden behind a tall leather collar was a mutant with glowing fiery chest where the lower half of his face should have been. In that show, he's just another mutant in the crowd. But in the comics, Chamber became one of the defining characters of the Generation X era. Jono first appeared in 1994's Generation X #1. Created by Scott Liddell and Chris Bocciolo. His mutation is one of the cruelest in X-Men mythos. When his powers first manifested during a party in London, a massive burst of psionic energy erupted from inside his body. The explosion destroyed his chest, his lungs, his throat, and his lower jaw, while also seriously injuring his girlfriend Gail Edgerton. The only reason Jono survived is because the same psionic energy keeps him alive. It acts like its own life support system, replacing everything his body lost. Since he no longer has a throat or a mouth, he communicates entirely through telepathy. He doesn't eat, he doesn't breathe, and he hides the glowing cavity in his chest behind oversized scarves and high-collar leather jackets. That same energy is also what makes him so dangerous. Chamber can unleash massive blasts of psionic force capable of ripping through energies and structures of life. And because the energy is constantly being generated inside of him, he never really runs out of fuel. He can also use it to propel himself through the air, giving him the ability to fly. It's an incredibly powerful mutation, but it's impossible to separate those abilities from the price he had to pay to get them. Every time Jono uses his powers, you're reminded that they destroyed most of his body before they ever made him a superhero. One thing I always liked about Chamber is that he never tried to pretend that everything was okay. While plenty of X-Men eventually embraced being superheroes, Jono always came across as someone trying to live with what happened to him. He was into grunge music, wore ripped up clothes, quoted bands like the Smiths, fit right in with Generation X's whole outsider vibe. He wasn't trying to be the next Cyclops, he was just a kid dealing with a mutation that had taken almost everything from him. His story took some interesting turns after Generation X. He eventually joined the X-Men, but things fell apart after seeing his former girlfriend Husk move on with Angel. Angry and frustrated, Jono lashed out, destroying a bar and picking a fight with said Angel. Not long after, he found himself caught up with the Weapon X program. Officially, he joined their ranks, but in reality, the bar fight and him joining was just him working undercover for the X-Men. During that time, Weapon X used their technology to rebuild his chest and restore his faith. For the first time since his mutation appeared, Jono could actually experience life as a normal person again. But since this is comics, that didn't last long. When M-Day stripped millions of mutants of their powers, Jono lost the psionic energy keeping him alive. Without it, his reconstructed body immediately began failing, leaving him powerless, jawless, and barely clinging to life. Eventually, he was taken by Clan Akaba, the descendants of Apocalypse. Because Chamber shares Apocalypse's bloodline, the group used Apocalypse's blood to restore his body and power, although it also left him with a temporary gray-skinned appearance. Jono rejected the cult, adopted the codename Decibel, and joined the New Warriors alongside Jubilee, using a specialized suit that let him create solid sound constructs instead of relying on his original powers. Later, Legion's reality warping powers restored Chamber's original mutation, bringing back both his psionic energy and the hole in his chest. Losing the normal life he briefly regained wasn't easy, but he eventually found a new purpose as a teacher at the Jean Grey School, helping younger mutants deal with the emotional and physical trauma that often came with their powers. Before the Krakoa era, Chamber even spent time leading the Morlocks beneath New York. After the Marauders attacked the community, Jono fought back with enough force to burn the attackers alive before being killed himself by an energy harpoon. Like many mutants during Krakoa, he was eventually resurrected, joining the New Mutants, working alongside Nightcrawler's Legionnaires and reconnecting with old friends like Paige Guthrie. Probably the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who didn't see him as a monster or someone to pity. As for where Marvel could take Chamber next, I'd love to see them finally explore just how powerful he could become. Pete Wisdom once suggested that Jono has the potential to reach Omega level status, and that's an idea Marvel has never really followed up on. Instead of keeping him tied to another X team, push him into Marvel's cosmic side. Imagine his physical body finally giving out completely, forcing him to exist as a being of pure psionic energy. Suddenly he's dealing with threats on the scale of collapsing stars and dimensional rifts instead of mutant politics, all while trying to hold on to what's left of the person he used to be. It would be a natural evolution of his powers while still keeping the focus on the part of Jono that's always mattered most, his humanity. Like Marrow, Chamber proves that some of the best X-Men stories aren't about the strongest mutant. They're about people trying to figure out who they are after their powers completely change their lives. Next up is Robert Herman, better known as Glob Herman. If you're paying close attention during the prison breakout in X-Men 97 Season 2, you probably caught a quick glimpse of his unmistakable translucent body, complete with his skeleton floating inside. It's one of those blink and you'll miss it cameos, but for longtime X-Men fans, seeing Glob show up was a fun surprise. I'll admit, Glob's always been one of my personal favorite X-Men. Maybe it's because, like just about everyone, there have been times where I felt like I didn't really fit in. That's basically Glob's story. He's a character who literally can't hide what makes him different, but over the years he learns that the people who matter accept him as he is. Glob's first appeared in 2001's New X-Men number 117, created by Grant Morrison and Ethan Van Sciver. His mutation is impossible to ignore. His body is made entirely of transparent, living bio-paraffin, leaving his muscles and skeleton completely exposed beneath a layer of wax-like skin. That wax was incredibly flammable, allowing Glob to coat himself in fire without burning away permanently. And despite how fragile he looks, his unusual body is surprisingly durable, letting him survive punishment that would seriously injure most mutants. Growing up wasn't easy. His father hated mutants, and when Glob's powers appeared, that hatred turned towards his own son. Thankfully, his mother got him out of that situation and brought him to Xavier's school, but years of abuse had already left their mark. Glob arrived angry, insecure, and convinced the world would never accept someone who looked like him. That made him the perfect target for Quentin Quire. After the murder of mutant fashion designer Jumbo Carnation, Quentin formed the Omega Game, convincing a group of frustrated students that violence was the only answer. Glob joined without hesitation. He helped assault Professor Xavier in his own office, took part in the school's infamous riot, and even had Match set his body on fire so he could charge after a bus full of human civilians as a living Human Torch. The X-Men stopped him before anyone was hurt, and Glob was arrested alongside the rest of the Omega Gang. In most comics, that's where a character like this would have stayed, a background villain who pops up every few years for a fight. Instead, Marvel did something I really appreciate. They let Glob grow up. Over the next several years, he slowly worked his way back into the X-Men's good graces. He bounced between Utopia and the Jean Grey School, where he became one of the more lovable students on campus. Some of his adventures were completely ridiculous. He was shrunk down to microscopic size to fight antibodies inside Toad's body, landed in telepathic detention after Rachel Summers caught him having embarrassing thoughts about Katy Perry, and was even expelled to the Hellfire Academy. But when Mystique offered him to kill Quentin Quire, Glob couldn't go through with it, and that was one of the first signs he'd become a different person. His biggest turning point came after Wolverine's death, when Spider-Man took over as a guidance counselor for a group of troubled students. Peter Parker saw past Glob's appearance and recognized the kid struggling with confidence more than anything else. Under Spider-Man's mentorship, Glob started to believe in himself, and before long he officially earned a place on the X-Men, while helping defend X-Haven, the mutant refuge hidden in Limbo. He never completely lost the awkward charm that made him so likable. He wore prescription glasses over his wax-covered face, somehow became friends with Mojo after giving him dating advice, and nearly lost everything when anti-mutant extremists tricked him through a fake mutant mingle profile and forced him to wear a bomb vest. Faced with the choice between saving himself or protecting his friends, Glob detonated the bomb harmlessly in an empty lobby rather than let anyone else get hurt. During the age of X-Men reality, Glob discovered he actually enjoyed a quieter life, spending his days as a farmer and taking care of 3 chickens named Hope, Logan, and Scott. It was also revealed that his living wax could block powerful telepaths, allowing him to secretly free his friends from Nick Gray's reality by coating them in bio-paraffin. That love of farming carried over into the Krakoa era, where he joined the New Mutants and helped recruit mutants to the island nation while continuing to prove he was much more than comic relief. After Krakoa fell, Glob settled in Marrow, Alaska, helping Scott Summers' new X-Men by growing food and cooking for the team. Then came one of the stranger developments in his history. During the X-Men Revelation, he found himself training under none other than Frank Castle, the Punisher. On paper, it's a pairing that shouldn't work at all, but it ended up showing just how far Glob had come. The Punisher didn't treat him like a joke or the weird-looking kid in the background. He treated him like someone worth investing in. As for where Marvel should take Glob next, I actually hope they keep building on that idea. Not every mutant needs to become an Omega-level powerhouse or save the universe. I'd love to see Glob step into a mentoring role for younger mutants who are struggling with their appearance or self-confidence. He's lived through abuse, made terrible mistakes, earned redemption, and slowly learned to accept himself. Few X-Men are better equipped to help the next generation through those same struggles. Glob Herman is proof that some of the best X-Men weren't always the strongest or the most famous. Sometimes they're just the ones that keep getting back up, keep trying to be better, and eventually become the kind of person they need when they were younger. And that brings us to the end of our look at some of the mutant cameos hiding in X-Men 97. What's so cool about these appearances is that they're not just random characters thrown into the background. Each one represents a different side of what makes the X-Men so interesting. The weird, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright tragic parts of mutant history. Marrow is probably the best example. She went from an angry, traumatized extremist who literally tore pieces of her own body into weapons, to someone who eventually fought to protect the same kind of world she once wanted nothing to do with. Chamber took the exact opposite approach. Instead of hiding what happened to him, he embraced it and became one of the more memorable members of Generation X. And then there's Glob Herman, who might have had the strangest journey of all, going from a furious, radicalized teenager into one of the most surprisingly kind and protective mutants around. None of these characters started out as perfect heroes. They were angry, damaged, and shaped by a world that constantly told them they didn't belong. But that's exactly what makes their stories worth reading. And that's partially what makes X-Men 97 so much fun to dig into. The show is packed with decades of comic history. These three characters are only a tiny glimpse at the amount of mutant lore hiding in the background. So if you want a sequel, let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, tell me which X-Men 97 cameo you want to see covered next, and subscribe for more deep dives into comic history. If you want to support the channel even further, consider joining through the channel membership. It helps support the time and research that goes into these videos, and members get their names featured in the credits. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.